Hi everyone, I hope you are all doing well. I hope you had a wonderful spring break. I know that I am posting this video actually before spring break, but as I mentioned previously, I will be out of the country and you just never know with internet, so I wanted to make sure that I got everything up and running for our next module and I didn't mess up any of your due dates and give you plenty of time to do all of the work. So, a couple of things. First off, Maslow is not with me today because I'm in my office and I had to give her to my parents to take care of since I will be out of the country. So, if you actually care, that's where the cat is. I wanted to touch base on a couple of things. I'll go into more detail after I have the chance to look at your committee reviews of that gifted education programming assignment, but I did want to comment on some of your discussion board posts. I do agree that this proposed education or gifted education plan, rather, is pretty good. Personally, I'm a really big fan of levels of services, and that is because I think that all students can benefit from differentiation and not just those highly gifted. So I really like the levels of services approach because it serves all students and it meets all students where they are. A lot of times with gifted programming, one of the biggest devil's advocates argument arguments that we get is, well, my child would also benefit from going to the museum and doing these creative problem solving groups and having all these other opportunities. So why is it that only the gifted should have these special opportunities? So a levels of services approach really combats that argument and says we are going to serve all children and then we're going to offer different levels of services depending upon their unique strengths and their unique needs. So I do very much like the levels of services approach. I also appreciate how Mr. Draper included his definition of giftedness, included his mission statement, and as I mentioned in my previous video, the fact that there is a committee placed to review this gifted education program is probably what impresses me the most. So a lot of my work that I've done in consulting or work with gifted ed, we just see a lot of stagnation. So we've had the same gifted program since 1990, and why won't it work in 2018? There should be a lot of reasons why it doesn't work. So having a committee like this in place is really important. In my opinion, it's very important to carefully select that committee so that we have teachers, we have administrators, potentially even parents, because we know that giftedness is not just contained within the classroom. So I did see a couple of good suggestions in terms of that discussion board post. I saw a few of you question the alignment potentially between how we are defining giftedness and then how we're serving it. That's something that we've talked about a lot this semester. So making sure if we have a very broad definition of giftedness, which clearly we want to include as many students as possible, that we are also providing those services that match their area of giftedness. So I don't think this program fails to do that, but I do think it could be a little bit more clear. One issue with levels of services is there are so many opportunities. Sometimes it can get a little convoluted. But overall, this is a great program. Again, I'll touch base again after I have the opportunity to read over your committee review statements. So I'm looking forward to that. I did want to provide just a quick introduction to our next module. So we are diving into what I call the invisible gifted. Several of you have already noticed this, that we have certain individuals or groups of individuals that are unfortunately less likely to be recognized for gifted education services. One of the reasons, which definitely relates back to this gifted education programming piece, is we do not do a lot of training in gifted education. So you guys, getting this gifted endorsement is a huge privilege, and it's going to really give you a leg up. And several of you are already starting to voice this importance of serving as an advocate, because there are a lot of misunderstandings about who the gifted are, what they look like in the classroom, and definitely a misunderstanding of the fact that depending upon the context, their gifted characteristics are going to manifest differently. So when we talk about the invisible gifted, there's a lot of students that could be, quote, invisible. We have culturally and linguistically diverse students. We have twice exceptional students, potentially behavioral issues. And for this module, what I really want to challenge us to do is change our thinking. So the one thing that my doctoral program really taught me was to shift from what we call a deficit mindset to a dynamic mindset. So when I go into a classroom, I am looking for strengths. And unfortunately, in education, we're kind of taught to look for needs so that we can close gaps. It's all about this person is struggling, how can I help them? This person is below where we need them to be, how can we bring them up? When I go in the classroom, I've just kind of been trained through a lot of different doctoral studies and different internships, different teaching opportunities. I go into the classroom and I see what are the strengths and how can we capitalize on those strengths. So that's what we call dynamic thinking. So oftentimes dynamic thinking is even recognizing what some would call a weakness and seeing how we can use that weakness for a positive change. So there's a lot of research on deficit and dynamic thinking. It's one of the areas of education that I'm most interested in. Some of the most well-known researchers in gifted education you will hear from this week in this module. Donna Ford, for example, is a huge voice in terms of equity in gifted education. You'll see that she often publishes with Tarek Grantham. Dr. Tarek Grantham is at the University of Georgia. I actually studied under him, so he was one of my mentors when I was getting my PhD. And he had a really big role in helping me see how I had a lot of underlying assumptions about who these gifted were. Not in the sense of I wanted to have these assumptions, but they were just there. So he helped me a lot in terms of how to shift from that deficit to dynamic thinking. So the case study, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory here. I summarized it very concisely, but this case study is actually based on a true experience. So in this case study, we have a student whose name is Jasmine going into one of her internship placements for a gifted education program. This placement is at a Title I school. All but, I think, 1.6% have free and reduced lunch. We have a lot of minority representation, which is just a really rich opportunity. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of evidence of deficit thinking. So Jasmine meets with her assistant principal and asks about the gifted and talented education program. And he says, we don't really have a lot of those type of students here in our school. So let that quote sink in for a minute. There are 338 students in this school. 0, I repeat, 0 have been identified for gifted education. That should make your heart hurt a little bit. That should make your brain turn on and think, what's going on here? Clearly they're there. The issue is, how do we find them? How do we identify them? How do we shift that mindset from, we don't have those type of students, to the more dynamic, oh yes we do, but their gifts are manifested differently in this particular context. So in terms of the library of materials, there are a lot of different materials. I'm very excited for you guys to hear from Donna Ford herself. One of the videos is a really good interview with her. You can see her personality shine through a lot and see how dedicated she is to really closing what we call the excellence gap. And there's also several readings and handouts based in both underrepresentation and culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students. One thing I did want to point out is I added an extra folder in this library. It's called the TABS material. So TABS stands for the traits, aptitudes, and behaviors. It's a referral tool that is used to identify gifted students based on characteristics of giftedness. This tool was specifically created for use with underrepresented populations. So if we think about identifying gifted children, oftentimes, unfortunately, we first go to a test score. We go to either an aptitude test or an achievement test. I cannot say enough about the fact that there is bias in aptitude and achievement tests. So if we base our identification decisions based off of one test, which is like the cardinal sin of assessment, we have a problem. And in order to meet culturally and linguistically diverse needs, but more so strengths, we have to also approach identification from more of a culturally competent standpoint. So I really encourage you to dig deeply into that TABS referral form. It is, in my opinion, my biased opinion, one of the best forms in order to identify characteristics of gifted students, mainly because it has characteristics listed in both positive and negative manifestations. So, for example, if we think about memory, so high capability to memorize a lot of information. If we think of the child who has just memorized the periodic table, we are instantly impressed, right? It's like, dang, you are in second grade. You know the periodic table. Clearly you're gifted. However, if we think of a child who's memorizing a bunch of rap songs, we're like, oh, that's cool, you like to listen to music, or why don't you put your headphones away and pay attention to science class? But that's the same exact characteristic, a capability to memorize a lot of information. They're just memorizing something different. For example, we think of curiosity. So you think of stereotypically, the gifted student, of course they're going to be curious about your class, right? So if you're in science class, then that gifted student should be raising their hand, but maybe they're the gifted student who's reading under their desk and they've got that book open and they won't put it away, they won't pay attention. That shows that they're curious. They're just not curious about your class. So in terms of this TABS referral form, I really like it because it encourages teachers to look at these various characteristics and think about how they may manifest in different contexts. So I realize there's a little bit more than usual information in this library. Of course, I would encourage you to at least look at everything. This case study it's a challenging one, and I want you to really think about it practically. I can almost guarantee you are going to encounter this type of experience at some point. So how do we combat deficit thinking? How do we provide practical tools to convince others that, hey, no, we have gifted students in all populations, in all contexts, and they all have these unique strengths and needs and require differentiated services. So I would dig into the library as soon as you can because there is more information than usual. But I've done my best to provide lots of different types of resources, ranging from that interview video to a few handouts and several different studies. So I look forward to touching base with you guys and reading your discussion posts and hopefully seeing some of your ideas about how to combat this deficit thinking and to help all of our students and our teachers view gifted education through more of a dynamic lens. Again, hope you had a wonderful spring break, and I will be in touch soon. Thank you.